Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
Today, Emily and I sit down with Father Jason Tyler to discuss Invitro-Fertilization. Father Tyler was ordained a priest in the Diocese of Little Rock in 2005. In 2006, he completed a license of sacred theology and moral theology at the Pontifical Regina Apostolium in Rome. He has served primarily in parish ministry in various parishes in Arkansas and has taught in Little Rock Theology, in the Little Rock Theology Institute, and in the Diocese Formation Program for Permanent Diaconate. He's been a pastor at St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Fayetteville, Arkansas since 2015. He's also the diocesan bioethicist for the Diocese of Little Rock, Arkansas, a role which involves addressing bioethical issues and serving as the diocese liaison to Catholic healthcare ministry. In addition to those assignments, Father Tyler is the chaplain for the Star Quest Production Network, a network of podcasts that seeks to serve the church, evangelize the world, and form authentic community through the creation of audio and video programs that explore the intersection of faith and modern culture. He is also a co-host of the podcast, Secrets of Star Trek. Please welcome Father Jason Tyler to the podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the NFP Podcast.
Hi, everyone.
Tonight, Emily and I are really excited. We are joined by Father Jason Tyler. He is a priest of the Diocese of Little Rock. Welcome to the podcast, Father.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So Father is joining us tonight to discuss in vitro fertilization, otherwise known as IVF, most commonly. And one of the most, I found this kind of interesting. I did a little AI search to ask the internet, what are some of the most commonly asked questions when it comes to infertility? And one of the most commonly asked questions is treatment for infertility.
Right.
So I kind of wanted to I'm going to just frame our conversation a little bit and then have you introduce yourself, Father, and kind of chime in on the topic, if that sounds okay.
Sounds great. Sure.
Okay. So given that that's like the most common question that's being asked, right? Like, what is the treatment? I want to just start off with something that Emily and I have already talked about with medical professionals on this podcast and have talked about a lot personally in our discussions, is that infertility is not a disease itself. It is a sign of some underlying disease. There's something that's causing the inability for sperm and egg to meet and for conception to take place. So that's kind of a general understanding. So when we talk about ways in which to rectify the cause of infertility, we want to look at approaches or consider approaches that restore the body to its corrective state, which would be fertility. Fertility is a sign of health. Mm-hmm. And so not bypassing issues, but correcting those issues so that we can ultimately firstly get to a state of health, which is fertility, and then that can ultimately lead to natural conception. And so all that being said, Father, I know you are doing wonderful work in the Diocese of Little Rock, especially there in Fayetteville, but maybe you can give our audience a little background of yourself, how you became a priest, in the quicker summary. I'm sure I'd love to hear your full vocation story, but how you became a priest, and then how bioethics kind of became one of your expertise.
Right. Okay. Certainly. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm glad to be able to join you tonight. I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, Little Marlton, Arkansas, population of about 7,000 people, and grew up in a Catholic family. We were always very involved in church, and when I was getting to my senior year of high school, I was always knew I wanted to do something to help people, to kind of to serve people. I had thought for a long time that maybe I would become a teacher. But also, as I started thinking about things, I started realizing that I really enjoyed my time as an altar server, really enjoyed being close to the altar and the sacraments. And so started to consider priesthood, and ultimately entered the seminary starting my sophomore year of college. And not yet convinced, that I was definitely going to be a priest, but thinking, okay, this is something I will try, something that we'll see, where the Lord is leading me. And as I went through those years, 7 years from then until I was ordained, every year it got a little bit more certain, a little bit more normal feeling that yes, priesthood really seemed like the right thing for me. So I did my seminary studies at the college portion at Holy Trinity in Dallas, and then for theology, I was sent to Rome to the North American College. And the way the system works here, it's a little different than some other places. You have the first 3 years of studying basically a general course of theology. Everyone's getting in the same classes, and then your fourth year, and then potentially a fifth year, you specialize in something. And so in my case, my bishop asked, what I'm interested in, what was I thinking about specializing in, and so I told him there were three things that really were kind of catching my attention. One was sacramental theology. Again, a love for the Eucharist and everything had really moved me to consider priesthood in the first place. Another was patristic theology. That would be the study of the church fathers, the first 5 centuries or so. How did our faith come to be articulated in that time, and what does that mean for us today, et cetera? And then a third thing I said was moral theology, the study of right and wrong, and I said especially as it relates to bioethical concerns. And part of my interest there was in looking at the technological side of things. As technology moves along, what does that mean for us as human beings? What does it mean for us in terms of what's right or wrong as procedures? But also, we have a lot of Catholic hospitals in the state of Arkansas. Even though it's a very small Catholic population, the number of hospitals is pretty significant, and the number of people treated in those hospitals is a pretty significant portion of our state. And so, so I mentioned to the bishop at the time those three interests, and he said ultimately that he liked the moral theology route in particular, also because of having those hospitals and looking for, potentially an advisor in that area and someone to really look in those issues in particular. And so, so I studied 2 years of moral theology and got a license of sacred theology. It's abbreviated STL. The unfortunate thing is, if I were ever to go back and do the doctorate, that would be abbreviated STD. And so it's not the most flattering thing to have, written after your name necessarily. But I see it sometimes abbreviated these days STHD, right, to try to break that up a little bit. But at any rate, so I did the STL. I was ordained in 2005, so that was my ordination year. And then again, the way the study system worked out is I went back for one further year of studies. My second year of the moral theology studies was when I was a priest already, and so I actually finished that degree in 2006. And so ever since then, I've served in various parishes in the Diocese of Little Rock, which covers the whole state of Arkansas. And then for a good chunk of time as well, I've also been given the title diocesan bioethicist, which means I'm supposed to be looking out at these bioethical issues and then advising the bishop on those and serving as his liaison to Catholic hospitals, to Catholic healthcare ministry within the diocese.
That's excellent. So the way I kind of framed the conversation around in vitro fertilization, or IVF, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight, it's really from the idea of a restorative reproductive medicine approach, which is more like the medical sciences of how,
Right.
IVF can there's two ways to argue whether IVF is a good thing or a bad thing. One is just medical practice, right? We could say it's just not good medical care because it's kind of like a Band-Aid approach. We're not really digging into why is it that you can't get pregnant? What's going on here? What's the issue, underlying cause? And so let's find that out and correct it. And so we were hoping with you this evening, we can address the Christian moral ethics. So for a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, why is it that, IVF, even though it ends with the good of a child, why is it not a good route to that end? And maybe we can just start first, Father. You can just speak a little bit to when we say the means to the end matter. What do we mean by that? And why does that matter?
Sure, absolutely. Love to answer those. Before jumping into that specifically, I do want to say, because I always try to say this when I talk about IVF, the pain of infertility is real. A couple desiring to have a child and desiring to have their own biological child, that's a good thing. We need to always remember that, in this conversation. It is a good desire. You could even say it's a holy desire because, what's the first command of the Lord to his people in the Bible? Be fruitful and multiply. That's the first commandment actually that he gives, in Scripture. And so yes, it is a good intention. It is a good desire. But as you say, the ends don't always justify the means. In Catholic moral theology in particular, and I think a number of other Christian traditions would see things similarly, although maybe not exactly in every circumstance. But the Catholic tradition in particular will view every moral action that we take, everything that we consider doing that could be right or wrong, having three basic elements to it. So the first element is what we call the object of the act. What is the type of thing that we're thinking about doing? And then the second is, what is the intention? Why am I wanting to do it? What's my goal? And then the third thing is, what are the circumstances? What's happening around me at the moment? And included within circumstances is the idea of consequences, what results from my action. And so if we were to take even what we're doing right now, what are we doing? We are recording a podcast. That is the object of our action, of all three of us at the moment. We are seeking to record that. Why are we doing that? What's our intention? Our intention is to spread the good news about our faith, to the good news about responsible love, responsible parenthood, and what the church teaches, etc. The circumstances are, well, each of us are in different locations on our computers. It's in the evening, but it's not like ridiculously late. It's kind of a pretty normal, bland set of circumstances in that way. And so we can say that what we're doing is a good action right now. We're doing something that is a good thing of itself. We have good intentions, and the circumstances are such that it doesn't negate any of that. But if you take any one of those three elements and change them from something good to something that is wrong, or we can say evil. Now, evil, sometimes we think of evil as like, absolutely horrible, like major murder kind of thing. In Catholic moral theology, evil just means the opposite of good. It's anything that we consider morally bad or morally wrong is evil of itself. And so if instead of, doing this podcast to try to teach the faith, let's say we went out and robbed a bank to try to get some money to pay somebody a whole lot of money to really, really teach it, in a deeper level and get it out there to a broader audience. Well, even if there's a good intention behind that, that's an evil action that we've undertaken. And so that would be wrong to do that. Or, kind of resetting things if we're still doing this podcast, but instead of having the good intention of spreading the good news and clarifying what the church teaches, if we were doing it with an evil intention of, I don't know, trying to gain someone's trust so that we could swindle some money out of them later or something weird like that. Well, not only would it be wrong to swindle the money out of them later on, it would be wrong to have that bad intention now, and even doing something that on its face is good with that evil intention in our hearts, that would be bad. And then again, kind of resetting things. We're doing the podcast. We have good intentions. But let's say the circumstances are that somebody's house is on fire, one of the three of us right now. Let's say somebody's house is on fire. Well, what you need to be doing is getting the heck out of there, calling the fire department, making sure to save your life or the life of anyone else in the house, not continuing to do the podcast. And so the circumstances in that situation dictate a different course of action, than what we would be undertaking right now. So object intention circumstances. Our society in the Western world, especially in the United States, but I would say really the whole Western world in the 21st century, is very much a society that we could say is consequentialist. And what I mean by that is to say that we focus on consequences. We focus only on end results rather than focusing on the means to get there. And both are important, right? We can't ignore consequences. That's absolutely part of the equation. But we also do have to focus on process and the means by which we get there. And so a consequentialist view is to say, well, this couple wants a baby. They can't have one by natural means. They've tried for a year or whatever, and it's not working. So let's use the method that is easiest, quickest, simplest, maybe to get them a baby. And there's no kind of thought there about, is this the right means? Is this the right method? The only question about method in a consequentialist view often comes down to, is it efficient? Does it do well? Does it do at low cost, whether that's a financial cost or an energy cost or a time cost or whatever? Does it do at low cost the kind of thing I'm wanting to do? And so the problem with consequentialism, and the problem, the reason the church insists on this idea, again, of looking not only at the goal, or not only the end, the final result, but even the process by which we get there, is that every action we undertake has an effect on who we are. And so if I, for example, if I say in my office, see someone that I don't like and I start gossiping about that person, well, I've committed the sin of gossip, but I've also made it easier for me to gossip again in the future. I have, hurt my own character in that way, in some way. And so it is with any of our actions that whatever we do makes it easier for us to do the same type of thing again in the future. And so that's why we have to look at, not only what's the result of what I'm doing, but also what is the process by which I'm getting there? What are the means that I'm using?
So often, thank you, Father. That was a great explanation. I think so often in this conversation, because we're dealing with, more often than not, like married couples, especially, let's just look at it like a Christian context, right? Like Christian married couple who says, I've heard this many times. I don't know if Emily, if you've heard this too, but many a time where, or even you, Father, it's like, well, God calls us to bear fruit. Like God wants me to have a child. And it's so much focus and emphasis on intention.
Yes.
Again, another thing Emily and I have discussed a lot, because we both struggled with infertility at different points in time, is how it's interesting how that desire for a child can become an idol, where even I get so fixated on the gift, I forget about the giver and God's will and God's plan and the way that God has this process worked out, and how that can be very dangerous. It can be very dangerous, and it can drive you, dare I say, like to an extreme term, like to a state of madness where now I'm not using my reason and my faculty. I am just charging ahead to get what I want, justifying it along the way to say, well, it's a good thing. I'm married. I want to be a mom. I'm going to be a great mom. I want to have a baby, or, my husband and I both, etc. So I think sometimes, I'm curious if you would agree with that or what you think about that, but I feel like that intention just clouds out so much of the conversation. Again, I'd say amongst a lot of Christians, where we're not thinking of the other aspects of making a good moral decision. What do you say?
I agree with you there. Yes, that intention kind of takes over things. And as I said earlier, it's a good intention. It's a good goal. And sometimes that's the most difficult thing, right? Is when we have a good goal and we can envision, what accomplishing that goal would look like. And we can envision, in this case, couples thinking about holding that baby in their arms. They're thinking about the child growing up. They're thinking about their role as parents. Those are great things. And sometimes it's when we have those really good intentions that we can almost be blinded by that and forget about the importance of using the right means to get there.
So let's, before we get into kind of the technical nature of IVF and why it's not a morally illicit decision for Christians, let's just say a little bit about, I guess, why, or when we're having that desire, if we have that desire, I think I want to talk a little bit about culpability. So say I am a Catholic Christian, I go to Mass on Sunday, to the best of my ability, right? I'm practicing my faith, but I'm not aware of the church's teaching on sexual moral ethics. Right. And we're trying to have a baby. And so we go to our doctor, and our doctor says IVF. And I happen to know other Catholics who have done IVF because this is something that has happened. And so I assume this is okay. And my doctor says this is the only option, so this is my world. This is all the information I'm receiving.
Sure.
And so I approach that process, and I go through that process. I guess at that point, we have good intention, and to their knowledge, they have all the other things too. They don't know the other stuff. So I'm just curious, as far as like in the eyes of God, right? Like how culpable would that person be in participating in an act of grave moral evil or sin?
Yeah. So our culpability is very much tied to what we know and what we understand. And so, when we don't know what the church teaches on this, it does, it definitely will limit the person's culpability, right? It will limit it quite a bit. Now, even with that, without knowing the fullness of the church's teaching, one might look at the procedure and recognize a couple of things right away. And like one of them is, if the doctor tells you we're going to create 8 embryos or 10 embryos or something like that, and we're only going to implant 1 or 2 or whatever, if you hear that and you're wondering what happens with those other embryos, and you don't sort of push that line to think, what's going on there? Why are these other embryos being created and not being implanted? Why are they being stored later on? What's happening to them? That's something, the person would be responsible for pursuing to try to figure that much out. And so there's some culpability that can still be had there. But kind of getting back to your main point, I think, is that yes, someone who is completely ignorant, through no fault of their own, perhaps, completely unaware of what the church teaches on this, would have significantly less culpability, possibly no culpability. It's hard to, because you're getting down into the sort of the heart of the person and what their knowledge is on these things. But we would still say the act of itself is still very wrong, and it's still going to have a negative effect on the couple that's engaging in it, because I think you put it earlier, we can get so focused on the gift we forget about the giver. If even a couple that is so ignorant of the wrong of IVF that maybe they have no culpability on it, even there, they still lose something of maybe their appreciation for divine providence, for God's graciousness in giving things, for the preciousness of life as a gift and not merely as a commodity. Do they perhaps, without even realizing it first, begin to see the creation of a child as something that can be manufactured rather than something that is given as that free gift from God?
Right. And you're using the beautiful terms of the church. I was just going to use kind of a lamest term to say, I know in my own sin experience, when I was not aware of the truth and the good and the beautiful, I still lived in the yuck. And it was even worse because I was unaware of what it was I was living in. I just knew it was yucky, but the world kept telling me it was fine. And it was like this rough juxtaposition of like, well, something inside of me says this is off. Like my conscience, right, is not at peace here. but all of the messaging says this is right, this is right, this is right, this is right. So it was like that battle within, not being able to give it any words, which I think can even be more frustrating sometimes than like almost a deliberate disobedience, where it's like, well, no, I know exactly why I'm miserable, because God said to do this and I did the complete opposite. I went after what I want to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you make a good point, Father. Like couples living in that situation or having gone through that process, they might be, they have that, maybe they ended up being able to conceive and have a live birth, and now they have a child, and that is a beautiful gift. And somewhere in there, we know, right? Like the truth of God, like there is some restlessness. Even if you weren't fully aware of the act that you participated in, there's still that residual yuck of having participated in evil or sin.
Father, I'd be curious, we're talking about, this feeling of like, I think I would venture to say that most Catholic couples, I think that they do know it's wrong. I think they don't know how it's wrong. And I think they choose to not figure that out. And I might be assuming, but I'm thinking of some specific instances that I've encountered personally. And maybe they do try to pursue why it's wrong. But that intention, right, that end goal is just in the forefront. Yeah. And to them, they can't understand why God would not want this baby for them. Yeah. And so still their rationale is kind of to the wayside, and they're just thinking like, I think I've heard it's wrong. I might try to look into it, but I still feel like the doctor's saying this is our only option. Yeah. And so they don't know about other options. That's the other problem. Yes. And so anyway, I'm just curious, and I don't know how in detail you might, but I just wonder if there's couples that come to you, obviously I know that you would steer them in the right direction with church teaching. I just wonder, some couples are so focused on the end result that I wonder if you see, that kind of, there's only so much you can do. I wonder if you experience that as well.
Well, sometimes what happens is if someone comes to talk to me about something they're considering, and they haven't done it yet, but they want clarification on what the church teaches, or they want some more insight, I will, try to present what the church teaches in the most pastoral way that I can, trying to gently, help them understand that. If ultimately they decide to take a different route, I often don't hear from them again, or at least it's a while, or it's not on that topic, or whatever, because there may be some. And I'm not just talking about this topic, but any topic. And
could be vasectomy. Could be. It could be anything.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I think if someone chooses the other route, which is obviously a very sad situation, they don't necessarily come and tell me about it. So I guess I don't hear, all the deliberation that went on in that way. I think there's a good chance, yes, that there are couples that fit exactly the category you're talking about, that they've got a feeling it's wrong, but they don't want to push too far. They don't want to go down that rabbit hole, as it were, because they're afraid of what they might find out, and they're afraid, that might dissuade them from what they're wanting to do. If so, that's actually what we call willful ignorance, not invincible ignorance, not, the kind of ignorance you can't be at fault for, but willful ignorance in the sense that you're trying to do something that you've got a feeling is wrong, and you're, as it were, trying to keep your conscience ignorant of the situation. And instead of reducing culpability, we actually, in that situation, we would say they're adding to their culpability. And that's, again, all the more tragic in what's going on in those kinds of situations.
And go ahead. And the good news would be that we have sacraments for that, right?
Absolutely.
Like, God is forgiving and merciful, and I think that part, and we might get into this in a little bit later, but there's a lot of confusion around especially if a baby results from IVF, this idea that I need to ask for forgiveness for this, I think there's a lot of confusion around that. So maybe we can get to that once we talk more about the actual physiological aspect of IVF.
Yeah. But I do want to follow up what you said, that yes, forgiveness is certainly available. And that is certainly something that, I would encourage anyone who has gone through IVF and been a part of that process. Please get to confession as soon as you can, and know that the Lord is ready to welcome you back. The priest is not going to yell at you, and instead, we're going to be trying to help you to move on to that next phase, to take those next steps in your spiritual life.
Before we move into kind of the actual nuts and bolts of IVF, and why is it that this is not moral, I want to just say two things. One is the importance of educating our clergy and those in pastoral ministry, counseling couples about alternatives to these methods, right? So that when couples come and ask questions, you don't only lay out church teaching, but you can say, if you're struggling with infertility, here is a boatload of great resources that you can go to now. I mean, praise God, we have so many resources that you can access virtually, even you can start to access in order to address the underlying cause. Because I think, Father, you said it a couple of times there, this fear, right? Well, if I find out what the church teaches, right? If I ask Dad, what if he says no? And remembering that fear is not of God. God is not a God of fear. God's not a God of confusion. And that's the enemy, right? Trying to keep you away from God, away from the truth, that he is our Father and he wants restoration and good things for you and health. And, documents like Humanae Vitae that lay out this beautiful teaching and call on our medical professionals to not usurp their position as this professional, and to kind of bypass the natural order just to find the end, which is the child, but that they are seeking out ways to restore the couple's health and their fertility in order to help them achieve that end. So everyone has a part to play in this process. It's not only on the couple solely. There's lots of moving parts, but you're right. I'm assuming this is correct to say, it does, whoever makes the final decision, there is a lot of weight of responsibility on that person themselves. So educating our clergy, helping them know what resources are out there is very important so that they can wisely counsel.
It is, because, we hate to be in the position of just saying what you're thinking about doing, no, don't do that, and not offering an alternative. We love to be able to offer an alternative. We love to be able to say, the church understands your anguish, your suffering in this state of not being fertile. We want to accompany you there. We want to walk with you to get to that point of being able to have a child through the loving embrace of husband and wife.
Right. In the means that God has ordained it to be. Yeah. Okay, so we've said IVF quite a bit now in the first 30 minutes. What are we talking about, Father? Do you want to kind of introduce, in general what this is and take it apart piece by piece as to why the church says this is not a good option?
Certainly, yeah. And of course, although I've studied moral theology and bioethics, I'm not, a scientist or anything that can get in, or a doctor to get into extreme details, but just in general, IVF stands for in vitro fertilization. In vitro is just Latin for in the glass, because what's happening is sperm and egg are united in a petri dish rather than, being united in the woman's body as they normally would be. And so to do this procedure, some eggs are taken from the woman ahead of time, and then the man is asked to give a sperm sample, which is one of the immoral situations of this whole process as well. But he gives a sperm sample that, again, they're able to take some of that sperm sample, some of the eggs from the wife, combine them in a petri dish, and generally in the United States at least, several embryos are created at the same time.
Father, I'm
Yes.
so sorry to interrupt you. Can we just pause for 1 second?
Okay.
So sperm sample is taken, which happens through oftentimes masturbation. Men have
Correct.
to
Yes, I'm
masturbate.
sorry. Mhm.
And so why is that? And like that's kind of like one of the first evils, I guess, of the process. And why is that
Certainly,
wrong?
absolutely. Yes, thanks for asking. Masturbation is wrong. Even when it's done again with the idea of wanting to have a child, and even when it's done with ultimately this longer term good of a child in mind. Ultimately, the wrong of masturbation is that it's using the body's sexual faculties outside of the husband-wife marital relationship, but instead using one's sexuality for oneself. Achieving orgasm alone rather than with one's spouse. And so it's wrong on those levels as well. And that is, yes, that's in terms of the timeline of things, that's probably the first, major evil act that happens in leading up to in vitro fertilization.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, certainly. Sperm and egg are united in a petri dish. And again, several embryos are normally created. And the reason for this is the success rate is not all that great in terms of, getting these embryos implanted and getting them to grow into a full-blown child. And so they create several embryos with the knowledge that some are not going to survive, even the much beyond the creation process. And so maybe, let's say they create 8 embryos and maybe 3 get implanted, and they get implanted into the mother's body, and they start to grow. And maybe, let's say in there, of those 3, one of them maybe dies right away as well. So that's where you've lost another embryo, another human person, because as soon as the sperm and egg have united, we have now all 46 chromosomes. We're no longer talking about just the father's DNA, nor just the mother's, but something that is a unique person at that point. Yes, a person that was created through illicit means, but still a unique person. And so we have some of these unique persons that are killed right away, and killed in a way that, we could say is negligent at the very least, probably something much more than that, but created in a process that we know that several of them will be destroyed. But let's say, 3 get implanted. One of them is, sort of doesn't start growing in the womb, but instead dies right away. So maybe 2 start growing in the womb. But then as the doctors watch things as they move along, they say, well, gosh, of these 2, sometimes it happens that we don't think they're both going to survive. We really recommend you terminate one of them. In other words, have an abortion a selective abortion for one of the 2, so that the other has a better chance of surviving. Well, this we see as wrong also, because you're targeting one life and actively extinguishing that life in the hopes, yes, of saving the other one. But it's a targeted killing when you get down to it. And so that's another element of what's wrong there. And let's then say you've got that one embryo that's growing, that moves through the different stages of development. Again, this is a human person from the moment sperm and egg combined. 9 months later, the mother can deliver a child much like she would deliver any other child. And mom and dad have their baby that they can take home from the hospital, that they can nurture, they can love. This is at that point a full-fledged, it's been a full-fledged human being since sperm and egg came together. But certainly by the time you take the child home, this is no less of a human person than one who was created in the way that God has normally ordained, the one that has been created through the sexual union, the loving sexual union of husband and wife. But now, having been created through in vitro fertilization, again, we have this one child that's able to grow up, but then we still have maybe 5 that were never implanted and that are instead going to be frozen. And so they're cryogenically preserved. And they get cryogenically preserved for a couple of different reasons. One of them is in case the couple decides later on they want to try for another child. Maybe they want to make a second attempt at that, because the whole process of in vitro fertilization is an expensive thing to begin with. So they don't want to do it more often than they have to, from doing the whole beginning. And so you've got these some that are preserved and frozen, but many of them never get implanted. Many, some couples maybe come back and they have, a second child that they try to bring to birth. And so maybe, there's still 3 or 4 that are kept frozen. And this absurd state, what happens with these human persons that are frozen and never get a chance to, breathe air and walk around and grow up. We don't know exactly. It's hard to find exact numbers on how many frozen embryos are out there in the United States. But in 2003, the estimate was 400,000. Now, that's 22 years ago. So that number's a lot higher now. I found one estimate that puts it at about 1.5 million. I suspect that number may well be higher than that 1.5 million, but I can't find, really solid numbers on that.
Thank you for that walkthrough. So the first act in this process that would be considered the evil is the masturbation, the collection of the seminal, the sperm sample. Because really there's actually nothing morally wrong with women. Oftentimes in this process, they have to take medication to grow follicles.
Right.
And they often have to grow a lot of follicles. It's not a very healthy amount of follicles. It's not normal.
Right.
So they want to grow a lot because, to your point, they want to try to increase success rate. So they grow these follicles and then they extract the eggs from the follicles that are mature. Sure. And there's really nothing wrong technically with that process.
Right.
The masturbation part for the male, that's kind of the first one that falls into the, evil category.
Absolutely, yes.
And then let's talk about the second part, that is the quote unquote the evil, which is the creation of the human life outside of the marital act. So the uniting of sperm and egg, not in the fallopian tube as it happens during a natural act of intercourse and conception, but in a petri dish. Why is that? Why does the church say that is wrong? It's still the uniting of sperm and egg.
Sure.
But why does it have to be in the unitive act of man and woman and not in a petri dish?
Right. So part of it, I think, if we want to think about the word procreation, not just reproduction, but procreation. What does procreation mean? It means we're creating for and creating with God. And so when a husband and wife engage in marital sexual intercourse and a child results from that, it's the DNA of the father and the DNA of the mother coming together, but it's happening, we say, with and through God, according to God's plan, according to the way he designed things. In vitro fertilization, though, with sperm and egg being united in a petri dish, it's instead a lab technician, that's making this happen. And instead of the child being that product of the loving embrace of mother and father, the child is instead the product of again the lab work, the technical side of things. And instead of recognizing a great gift from the great giver who is God, it's a mechanical process, very separated from the loving physical embrace of mother and father. We are, as human beings, we're incarnate spirits, we're body and soul. And so when we pass on new life, that's, it's meant to be involved, not just our brain power and figuring things out, but very much the body in the way that it was designed, being able to pass on life.
It almost speaks something of who God is too, right? That God, at least I think about that sometimes, and it brings that awe and wonder of who God is that God is not cold like a peach. He doesn't think of the creation of human life as like a science experiment and how many people can I just pump out there.
Right.
It's so intentional. It's so planned. It's so willed on his part that we be conceived through the greatest act of love this side of heaven, the unitive act of man and woman.
Right.
And then that we're made in his image. We're made in, in scripture, right? We're formed in our mother's womb. Like there's just something so holy and sacred and beautiful and precious about that act. And there's something so cold and sterile about a petri dish,
Yes.
And maybe that's two feelings, right, for moral theology. But
but it speaks to, what resonates within us, right? I mean, we have
Right.
a natural sense of right and wrong within us. And so I think what you're touching on, even though it may be an emotional reaction that we can have at first, it's an emotional reaction that's rooted in a natural understanding of right and wrong.
Now, would this be wrong to say, or a stretch, I guess,
Mhm.
to say, okay, so then we create this life in the petri dish,
Mhm.
but then we try to get back on track because at least we put the life back into the womb for growth.
Right. Sure.
We're not we don't then put the baby from the petri dish into this sterile womb machine
Right.
that grows the baby and then comes out of the machine and the baby takes it home, like Terminator-esque robot type world. We haven't gotten there yet. Hopefully never will. So, that part, that's I guess a good of the process, or what would you say?
Yes, I would agree that implanting the embryo into the woman's body is better than a completely artificial process of gestation. I would say, though, that probably a big part of the motivation at this point is just we don't necessarily have the machine that would be the artificial womb that would help the child to grow throughout that process. And so part of the good you're identifying is a good that's kind of necessary to the act, as it were, that at the moment there's no other way to do this. And so but yes, I do agree that there is something better about the child being able to grow in that natural environment as opposed to an artificial one.
And that good does not wash out the evil before, just to be clear to everyone.
Yes,
it's like,
absolutely.
Well, the baby eventually made it back into my belly, so it's all good. It's like, no, that's not really the case either. What were we going to say?
Well, we talk about, we don't have this machine that can grow a baby, but in essence, you could kind of say surrogacy is kind of, if the mom's body they think cannot support a healthy pregnancy, well then, okay, let's go buy another womb, so to speak. So that's another avenue that can be taken and that also is not of God's will.
Correct.
For the baby.
Yeah. Up until now, I've been describing this process, assuming, we're talking about, say, a man and woman, that are sort of doing this together, and the child is being implanted into the womb of the mother who provided the eggs. But you're right that sometimes in the case of surrogacy, we don't even have that. We have instead a child that's created through in vitro fertilization, implanted into the womb of a woman who is not the biological mother of this child. And so some of the difficulties we run into on this is that there's a huge potential for really abusing a woman in this case, right? In the sense of who's most likely to agree to do the surrogacy thing. Well, sometimes it's somebody who needs the money. And so it's really in these ways kind of preying on the poor in many times. And so that's one of the other major wrongs that can happen in this process. The other side of it is, even setting that part aside for a moment, if a woman carries a child in her womb for 9 months and gives birth to that child, and then she's asked to step away and not be a part of that child's life, what else are we doing to her emotionally and everything else that is, very problematic in its own way?
I remember at one of my son's swim lessons when he was young, it caught me so off guard. I think because I read about a lot of these cases kind of in an abstract way. I don't meet and encounter a lot of people. And I forget what we were talking about. Maybe I had already been pregnant. I just found out I was pregnant with the twins or something like that. And anyway, the topic came up. We were talking about fertility, et cetera. And she shared that she was a surrogate for
Oh
one of her
my.
best friends. And I was so caught off guard. I was like, I have no idea what to say right now. Like, I'm just so taken aback by this. But how she had this very like service oriented mindset about it. And like this really like no attachment to the baby. It was just, she talked to her husband about it. She's like, look, I can carry babies really easily. Pregnancy is not that hard for me. My friend's having a hard time having a baby. What if I just carry the baby for her and give it to her afterwards? So at least from the outside and from our conversation, it seemed as if there was like no emotional attachment or experience from this. And maybe that can totally be someone's experience and happen.
In some cases, possibly, yeah.
In some cases, right. But it did, again, it kind of goes back to like the sterility of the petri dish.
Yes.
Like, what is it that we're talking about here? It's not a product. It's a person. It's a human being.
And
so to just make it as simple as like an exchange of goods and ideas, like we do in the free market or in a, in like the economic system that we have here in America, just kind of an exchange of, well, I have a want. You have a skill, let's trade the wants and the skills and exchange some money here and we'll all be satisfied. Like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Father, but like that's one of the main caveats to this realm is that we have to put this in the context of like, we're talking about human beings. This is a very different category, not a product, but a person.
Yes, definitely. And that's, again, that goes to one of the root of something we've said a couple times, I think, is that one of the fundamental difficulties with something like IVF is that it does to view persons like products rather than the persons that they are, the unique individuals that they are.
Emily, did you have any questions or anything? Okay. So maybe we can just take a minute then to Father. Let's just address the nature of the person, because now we're living in a world where there are lots of people walking around that were conceived in IVF.
Yep.
And just to touch, I guess, a little bit on like, they're still unique human beings created in the image and likeness of God, like the value of their human life. Because again, something that kind of caught me off guard. I was working with college students and we were walking to brunch one day after Mass. And this young girl shared with me that I don't think she ever met her father. I think her mom just like went to a sperm bank and she was conceived via IVF. And she just shared a personal experience, kind of anecdotal, obviously, but like how she always felt she was dealing with some mental health issues and kind of in her pursuit of healing, really felt there was this deep connection between being a child who was conceived and brought to life through this process of IVF versus someone who wasn't. And there is some interesting research kind of looking at the lived experiences of people who were conceived and brought to life through IVF versus, conceived naturally and came about live birth. So let's just touch, I guess, to talk to maybe that person, the adult now walking around who hears that, wow, how I was conceived was evil and wrong and not good.
Yeah.
But I'm still good. Like, how does that person come to that conclusion? Like, I'm still a beloved son or daughter of God, even though the means in which I was conceived was not good.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say is absolutely what you just said. This is someone who is certainly loved by God, someone who is created in his image and likeness, even if the process of bringing that person to life was through illicit means. And I think one thing I would remind this person of is that, all of human history, we have, people who were conceived outside of marriage, in many cases. Some, God forbid, even through rape. We've had some children conceived that way and brought to life. And in each of those cases, that is still someone who is very much loved by God and still very much a child of God along the way. And so just comparing it just for the moment to someone who maybe was conceived outside of wedlock and perhaps this person's biological father was never part of his or her life. And that's a painful wound of itself right there. We always have recognized certainly the value of that person and that person's life. And so I would use that as our analogy to talk then about the value of the life of the person who was brought into the world through IVF. Again, not the means that should have been used, but still we're talking about a real human being with the same dignity, the same rights, the same connection to God and his goodness that any of us would have.
So I wonder, as we kind of start to wrap up here, Emily and I talk a lot in like preventative language. How can we be preparing on the front end of marriage before we even get to the point of marriage to learn the church's teaching, to have a good understanding of our bodies and how the complementarity of them work, so that way when we get married, it's not just, oh my gosh, how do we do this, NFP thing, and what does the church teach? And now we're trying to find all these answers. Like, that's the time when you want to be enjoying your marriage and your relationship and not in this kind of chaotic, crazy, confused state and trying to put all these pieces together. So I wonder, when it comes to, I guess, the moral ethics of this realm, what are some things, I have an idea, but what are some things you think that we could be doing better as a church to prepare couples who may be entering into discerning marriage, right? Are engaged in discerning marriage,
right?
To prepare them for this. And if you don't mind, I just wanted to add 2 things and then hear your thoughts. So one of them I was going to say is obviously present the truth of marriage is for the sanctification of the spouses and the procreation and education of children. And that's a good and beautiful thing. And we want to pursue the procreation and education of our children.
Right.
And that being said, we do that within these means and these boundaries, knowing that, and Emily and I talk about this on the podcast a lot, it's like, we don't know when we're getting married what God's desire for our family size will look like.
Right.
All families throughout history have looked different. We see this in scripture. We see this lived in the lives of the saints. We don't know. We're kind of blindly signing on the dotted line and like, okay, Lord, your will be done. We don't know what that is. And so knowing that children are a good and a blessing from the Lord, and also knowing we don't know what it's going to look like, I think holding those 2 things at the same time are really important, so that they know that the church is teaching, and yet we're managing expectations slightly by saying, but we don't know what this is going to look like yet, what your fertility health status is going to look like. Should you need help, here are some great resources that are aligned with church teaching. So I feel like that's kind of one big thing is out at the gate. It's kind of setting them up for success. And I forget the other one. So maybe you can just kind of respond to that one. I'm sure I'll think of the other one.
Sure. Yeah. So I think absolutely, stressing the idea of children as a gift from God. And I think we try to do that when we talk about NFP and we talk about, why not to use contraception. We see children as a gift, and we're often speaking about it from the sort of the positive thing, to say, hey, welcome any child that is conceived and be ready for that to happen. But it is important kind of to say from the other side as well, to be able to say, a child being a gift means it's not something you have an automatic right to. It's something that, comes from the goodness of God. One of the things that when I'm working with an engaged couple, when they take the focus assessment, that's the Facilitating Open Communication, Understanding, and Study is the acronym on that. But one of the questions in there is something to the effect of, I could handle it, or I would be okay, or something along those lines, if I found out that I or my spouse was unable to have children. And it's interesting, talking to couples, when they confront that question, because I've had a number that have told me, I've never considered that possibility before. I've never thought about the possibility that we might not be able to have children. I've always just assumed that I'm going to be a father or a mother, that's going to be part of my calling as a married person. And it's good to assume that, really, to start off, because that's the normal way of things. And marriage is, yes, as you say, for the sanctification of the spouses and for the procreation of children. But at least even to think a little bit about the fact that it might not go perfectly. It might not go exactly the way you're thinking about, is something that I think is helpful if we can get that out in a careful and loving sort of way. And then, as you say, also, as we said earlier, let them know there are resources, that they can look at, something like fertility care, or at the St. Paul VI Center in Omaha, et cetera.
Great. Okay, I really can't remember the second one. So, Emily, do you have any other thoughts or questions? That's funny.
I don't. I'm wondering, was there anything, Father, that you feel like we left unturned that you wanted to speak more about or add to?
Let me just take a quick look here.
Yeah.
Oh, and I guess just one thing, because I had a couple notes written on my computer. Some of where this issue is coming up a lot lately is that President Trump has promoted it.
Oh, yeah,
that's
great.
He said that he wants to make this more accessible, and again, I think we can start with maybe an assumption of good intention. That's what I try to do with anyone's statements, and say that, okay, he and some of his supporters want couples to be able to have children, and they're seeing this as the method. And it's unfortunate that it's being promoted at that level, because it's makes people think it's okay, makes people think that it's a good thing, when in fact, for all the reasons we've said, it's not a good thing. And so many embryos are lost every year to the IVF process, that on a numerical scale, it's rivaling abortion now in terms of lives lost. And so, anyway, I just mention that as something that it's in the news because of that, I think, and it's probably going to continue to be in the news for those reasons. It's probably not something that, practically speaking, we would see ever be outlawed in the near future. I don't think there's the political will in this country for that. But I would love to see some limits and regulations on it, in the way that even places like Italy and Germany, will only allow, I think it's 3 embryos at a time to be created, instead of having all these multiple spares and surpluses. It's far fewer there. So, at any rate, these kind of things, obviously, the first and foremost has to start within individual human hearts and minds, and it has to be the individual persons deciding to do things the right way. But hopefully in the political sphere as well, I pray that we don't see our country promoting this practice more than what it is already.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up. Emily and I had mentioned that as well. Just kind of the shock and awe of like, whoa, this is being endorsed now on more of a national level. And to your point, I think it's totally with a good intention. I think the intention is nothing but we want more babies. I think he even said that in the press conference, like,
Yeah.
Well, we want more children. Like, this is a way to get more children, which just, I think everyone that knows the statistics, that knows restorative reproductive medicine is just kind of yelling at the TV, like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, someone told you IVF was a good thing, and you're just speaking that back. Like, you don't actually know what IVF is. Because he's not stupid, I think
Right.
he'd be open to reason of, like, if someone sat down and asked, and if you inquired, right, as to why are so many people opposed to this, you might learn some more information. So, yeah, I think one of the nice things about it, though, is it is drawing it up as a conversation, at least, I think, in the public square, which can allow for that time of debate and kind of back and forth,
Right.
so that we can bring that to the forefront, the discussion of like why the means to the end really does matter a lot.
And when you mentioned restorative reproductive medicine, that reminded me of something else that I was saying to someone not long ago, that if you think about restorative reproductive medicine being sort of the analog to natural family planning, and IVF being the analog to contraception, there's a common point in both, in that NFP takes a little bit of work and sacrifice. Restorative reproductive medicine takes some work and sacrifice. Contraception is kind of the way. IVF is kind of the easy way. And the easy, quick way is often not the way that we're called to. It's the narrow path, the difficult path. That's very often where we grow and where we come to know the Lord better.
I think the other part of IVF I was reminded of when you were talking about, the president endorsing it, was we had a woman on kind of share a little bit of a conversion story. She has had 5 children through IVF, a set of twins, and then 3 others. And but the way that they approached it, to your point about maybe adding some restrictions on it, was, and this is kind of without her recognizing any of the evils of the act, is that they did feel very strongly about not doing like 8 embryos at one time. So they actually did 3 rounds.
Okay.
And they created, 3 embryos or 2 embryos the first time. It was very, manageable, quote unquote, as far as the numbers. And everyone was implanted. And not everyone survived, but everyone was given a chance. So I guess I think about this process too as almost like tiers of evil. Would that be correct to say, Father? Like levels of evil,
Yes.
And you can approach this and like that, the way she did it, the way her and her husband approached this, kind of unbeknownst to them as far as any, teaching of morality, seemed a little bit more measured and good. Dare I say that word, good, than just let's get as many embryos and we'll freeze a bunch and we'll go back. Like she doesn't have any babies that are frozen. They've created, I think maybe they created, 8 total, and 5 of them are alive and 3 of them are now passed. And now she knows that, and now so she wrestles slightly with this, like, well, part of me doesn't regret it because I had these wonderful children.
Yeah.
But I do recognize that wasn't the right path, and that there were other options for me to try to get pregnant that she now knows about, and now she's promoting those. So it's a really cool story.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are cases like that where we can maybe even just in the hopes of getting to the ultimate end where we're not using IVF, we can at least be taking measurable steps.
Absolutely.
To limit the creation of human beings and then freezing of them.
Right. Yeah, because in the situation you're talking about, at least that's someone who did not want to have the extra embryos created, did not want to lose more human lives than was maybe necessary or whatever.
Right.
Process.
Right.
Can you talk about, Father, like in an instance like this and any instance with IVF, when it comes to confession? And I also think about like the examples you were talking about with babies conceived out of wedlock. I think, I don't know, for me, it's easier to understand how a woman would come to confession or a man would come to confession saying, I'm sorry, Lord, I've done this, this, and this. And that feels more, I don't know, appropriate than this act that they this road they intentionally went down, and then it did conceive this baby in the thoughts that most things were good along the way. What would you tell them in regards to the aspect of confession, and even though they do have these babies, perhaps?
So I think one thing I would tell them is and kind of getting to the point you were speaking to a moment ago, Amy, that we're not talking about pure absolute evil. Anything in this world is going to be a mixture in some ways of good and evil. And you can appreciate the good elements even of an evil action. And so, if creating the child through in vitro fertilization is wrong, if that's an evil action, but yet something good resulted from it, you still love that child and you still embrace that child and everything. Very similar, again, to a child conceived out of wedlock. One of the big differences being the amount of deliberation that's probably involved in going to IVF. Probably there's a lot more thought that goes into that than a typical situation where a child is conceived, before a couple gets married, say.
I wonder if this kind of goes along with we talk about the gift of contrition, where you can be made aware. It's almost like I think I've heard people talk about this when it comes to evangelization, how sometimes when you're just presenting the truth and the beauty and the goodness of who God is, and that's the focus, like the heart is stirred to how to this sadness
Mhm.
over not seeking that first or putting that aside.
Right.
And I can just, in my own personal experience, it's like no one actually told me, now that I think about it, that like the way I was living was intrinsically evil, even though I knew it somewhere in my heart.
Sure.
But it was this learning about the beauty of the and truth and goodness, and then my own sorrow of settling for less and choosing something else.
Yeah.
And then, and then to realize in doing that, I have hurt God, who loves me so much. And that's where that sorrow comes from, right? Is that relationship of like knowing God's great love for me, and that I, through my actions and my will, have hurt that relationship. Oh, it's like, I can't look at you, God. Like, I don't want to look at you, like I feel so sad at that's such a gift. And I think sometimes in our culture, and this is one of the other aspects of kind of IVF, and if we're just moving so quickly and we're going towards that goal, and the goal is a baby, we don't have time to sit and be empathetic and to sit with someone in their sorrow of not being able to conceive. And Emily and I have had many experiences. I'm sure you have multiple experiences, Father, more than us, but of sitting with couples, or you sitting with people at various stages of their life when they're sad and there's nothing you can really do about it. And and it's hard to sit with someone in their sorrow because you want to fix it. You want to give them the answer. We're back to happy. We're going to get what we want.
Yeah.
And it's like this, like a level of humility, just raw honesty, where it's, you are sad and suffering right now, and I'm really sorry. And I'm going to try, we can try these things and we can move in this direction. But maybe that's definitely a podcast for another day, but just the value of suffering and that sorrow, and that God wants to meet us there, and still bring about good things. And we can trust him, all those things. I feel like this conversation was very productive, Father, and that like, it's not shaming anyone, but it is stirring a conscience to know right from wrong, and to bring us back, which I think, Father, I know whenever I've gone to Mass and with your homilies, and just as you as a priest, like I always felt very convicted and consoled and reminded of who God is that these things are hard, but it's not because God is, damning me or this punishing. He wants this deep connection and relationship. And sometimes the means by which he goes about pursuing that are a mystery, and I don't quite understand it. And they're uncomfortable, and I don't like them. But they're still serving a purpose. There's some good there. So it is hard to have these conversations if we're not in that context of relationship with God first and foremost.
Yeah. And when we are in that relationship, something like redemptive suffering makes a whole lot more sense. And when we are in that relationship, we can have that kind of filial love and filial, even fear in a good way, the fear of disappointing God, our Father. And that's, as you say, once you come to understand his goodness, once you come to understand the beauty and the grace and the wonderful things he's offering, then you can have some of that contrition that's born not from somebody telling you, hey, what you did was wrong, but rather, here's the ideal, here's the good. And you recognize, gosh, I fell so far short of that.
And in his mercy, he wants to bring us out of it.
Absolutely.
Right? Praise
God. Wants to bring us out of it and wants to bring us back into his loving embrace.
Into his fold. Absolutely. So it is not hopeless, and we are not helpless. So that is good news. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Father.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for what you're doing with this podcast. And I pray that it's a help and an inspiration for many along the way.
Oh, thank you, Father. Yeah, that's our prayer too, for sure. So we will link to, we'll link to Father's cool podcast, Secrets of Star Trek. If we have any Trekkies out there, he's got a fun little hobby podcast on the side. So we'll link to that. And we'll also link to, the National Bioethics Center. That's a great resource for people who are looking for information. And we'll link to some of our favorite, NFP resources for couples that are looking for alternatives to IVF, so that they can restore their health and hopefully conceive a child and grow their family. So Yeah. Thank you again, Father, so much
Thank
for your
you.
wisdom and your insight. It was wonderful. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good night.
Welcome. Have a good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Bye.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.